As you probably remember, Quiz 10 had 3 modules covered: culture and emotions, emotional intelligence, and motives and goals. Even in semesters where I have plenty of time in class, we only end up talking about emotional intelligence and motives and goals. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. The way we'll proceed is I'll record a short lecture on emotional intelligence, and then a separate one on motives and goals, so you can kind of divide them up and watch them whenever it's convenient for you. With respect to emotional intelligence, really the whole module, in a sense, is really a description of this 4-branch model of emotional intelligence. So that's what I'm going to describe. And the way I'm going to do it, no surprise, is through a series of self-references. This is clearly the sort of thing that I'd want you to be able to do. As we've talked about a few times, if you want to use this material, one of the first things you want to do is to try and recognize how it applies to you. So let me jump down to the 4-branch model. Oh, and actually we'll point out on the way. If you notice the definition, ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, blah, blah. But down at the bottom, emotional intelligence includes 4 specific abilities: perceiving, using, understanding, and managing emotions. So that is the 4-branch model. And one thing that I can do through this description of myself and how the 4-branch model applies to me is I can help clarify some of the possible confusions between these different branches, and also note that there are relationships between them. They're not completely separate. So I think it's actually pretty useful to think of the idea of branch, right? So a branch is part of a tree. Those branches are all connected to each other by that large trunk of the tree. Okay? So first branch is perception of emotion. Okay? And what I would like for you to do to make this a little bit clearer is modify that first sentence there, and don't say capacity to identify emotions in themselves and others. Just focus on identifying emotions in others. There's another branch in which we identify emotions in ourselves. So we're talking about looking at other people and being able to figure out what their emotions are. Facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, as the textbook says here. If I think about myself, I would say that I am decidedly below average, at least on the facial expression side. Right? I struggle in a typical class. I might look around the room and I'll see 30 students looking back at me with what look to me like essentially neutral expressions. Right? I'm getting better, and we can talk about that in a bit, but not so good. Okay. Body language, probably even worse. Right. I was raised at a time of thinking that body language was just not at all a reliable indicator of people's emotions, and so I just don't pay attention to it at all. Tone of voice I'm actually pretty good at. Okay. Obviously, it would be more true for people that I know. Right? So, for example, if I'm talking to my wife, I can usually guess when she's a little bit more annoyed than she's trying to indicate, again, through the tone of her voice. So if you put the 3 of them together, I net out as below average. Yeah. Second, use of emotion to facilitate thinking. This one, to help clarify, I want you to take out the word thinking. Okay? So how well do we use emotions to facilitate really any activity that we've got going on? I mean, clearly thinking is part of that. Right? So for example, when some students take exams, if they feel any anxiety at all, if they're nervous at all, they think that's a bad thing, and they feel as if they have to reduce that anxiety. And that's probably not true for most people. Right? There is an optimal amount of anxiety, and that optimal amount is not zero. Right? If you're too relaxed, you're not going to do your best. Obviously, if you're too nervous, you're not going to do your best. It's trying to find that sweet spot in the middle where you have enough to be alert, to be able to do your best, but not so much that you're overwhelmed. Right? But then also realize we're not just talking about using emotions for thinking. There are other activities, other behaviors that we do that emotions can help or hinder. And so for me, I like thinking about athletic endeavors. Right? So as you may realize, I like to race. Okay? I used to do triathlons, okay? But I don't really like swimming, so I don't do them anymore. And when I would stand, for triathlons, the way it works is you swim first, then you bike, and then you run. And because I don't like swimming, I would be standing at the edge of the water, just almost shaking with anxiety, right? And so if I would jump into the water when I was feeling like that, I would immediately exhaust myself and barely be able to finish the swim. So before a triathlon, I actually have to calm myself down in order to be able to succeed. Now I do obstacle course races, and in a way, I kind of have the opposite problem. If you did cross country or run cross country now, you might realize you actually have to start out pretty fast, okay? Because if you don't, you're going to get caught behind the large rush of people who did go fast, and then it quickly goes down to a single track, and you end up not being able to pass people. Obstacle course races are the same way, right? So if you don't get out in front of your peer group in the beginning of the race, you're probably not going to catch them. So if you're too calm in the beginning, you actually have to kind of pump yourself up a little bit. Okay? With respect to myself, I'm actually pretty good at that. Okay? So I know when I need to be angry to be able to do something. I know when I should probably not be angry to be able to accomplish some goal. I know how much anxiety is approximately the right amount. But if you notice, this is one that also applies to facilitating actions in others as well. So if you think about what I said a few minutes ago with my inability to recognize other people's emotions, you might then realize I'm not so good at facilitating people's behaviors using their emotions. So you see the branches are connected. Right? So if I can't tell if my students are bored or angry or whatever, right, I'm not going to be able to help. People who are good at that can. My favorite example is a self-reference from a student who had been a swimming instructor. And she said that, hey, you know what, sometimes you get kids there and you actually need to really, really calm them down. They're so scared they're not even going to jump in the water. Other kids, you actually probably need to make them more scared, right? They're ready to jump in, water over their head, and they have no idea how to swim. And so she has to recognize who is too nervous, who is not nervous enough, and then actually increase or decrease that level of anxiety accordingly. Yeah. Third, understanding emotion. So you remember a few minutes ago I said, hey, for branch number 1, think of that as recognizing emotions in other people. This is kind of recognizing emotions in yourself. Okay? both understanding that there are subtle differences between different types of emotions. We have different words for anger, resentment. What do those things mean and how do they feel different? And also the reasons for those. Okay, this is something that I think I'm probably pretty good at. I'll have some situations where I'll be in a bad mood and somebody will ask me why I'm in a bad mood, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know, just leave me alone. I don't know why. I usually know why. The phrase, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, indicates that you just got up and you're just in a bad mood for no particular reason. That doesn't happen to me very often, right? I usually know why. Okay? And then the other part about this understanding your own emotions, you'll notice it's not just the causes, it's also the trajectories. That is the direction that you're likely to go based on that emotion, right? So I know, for example, if I come home and I'm in a bad mood, I know that I'm likely to be a little bit short-tempered with my wife or with Evan, and can kind of predict what might happen. Which, of course, brings me to the fourth branch, the one that I think I'm probably the best at. Right? If I can predict where my emotions are likely to lead, I can manage them. I can control it. Right? So you all know people who are not good at this. Right? They fly off the handle very easily. They lose their temper. They yell. They throw things. I never do that. I've been teaching at College of DuPage for 23 years now, right? In 23 years, I have lost my temper in front of a class exactly 0 times, right? And obviously everybody loses their temper a little bit. They kind of lose control, but it doesn't happen to me very often. So let me finish this section with a quick description of the major test that they use to measure emotional intelligence, this Myers-Salavi-Caruso emotional intelligence test, 141 item test, 8 tasks, so 2 for each of the 4 branches that we just talked about. In order to get the actual test, you have to pay for it, and I don't have access to it. But I do have some sample questions, and we can take a quick look at those. All right, so again, 8 subtests, so 2 for each of the 4 branches. So here's one example for identifying emotions. So they're going to show you a bunch of pictures, for example, and then you have to indicate how much of a particular emotion that you see. And notice that with this face, some people might be tempted to say, well, he's smiling, so there's probably a fair amount of happiness, maybe a 3 or 4, but I'm pretty sure that they're intending this to be low on the happiness side, because, and I realize the quality of the photograph is not great, but you can see around the eyes, there's really no engagement of those muscles around the eyes, and a genuine smile that indicates happiness will have a little bit of a crinkling around the eyes like that. Fear, I think it's reasonably clear. Most people agree there's not a lot of fear in there. But there is probably a reasonable amount, maybe a 3 or 4 of sadness. Again, even though he's smiling, what we're looking at in this case is the eyebrows. Remember I said earlier I'm not very good at recognizing facial expressions. I am getting better. So I've actually learned, for example, how important the eyebrows are in indicating emotions. Some of you have known this for a long time, but again, I'm pretty late to the game here. So this kind of sloping down and out of the eyebrows is indicative of sadness. Right? So this is probably a face that shows more sadness than anything else. Yeah. So for an example of the using emotions, these are usually pretty easy, I think. And by the way, the actual questions on the test, some of them will be easy, and some of them will be a little bit harder. So what mood, what emotions might be helpful to feel when meeting in-laws for the very first time? You figure similar to the idea that I gave you about taking a test, you probably don't want to have no tension, right? If you're too relaxed, you might say something that you regret later. Obviously, you don't want to have a ton of it, so you probably want to be somewhere in the middle, right? Enough that you're guarded and you're going to put your best foot forward, but not so much so that you're going to just be frantic. Surprise, I'm guessing you probably want to be pretty low on the surprise side, unless they do something surprising, I guess. And then for joy, I don't think you want to be up here, probably. They might think you're being insincere, but you should probably indicate some degree of happiness when you see them, right? I think of this one as maybe the easiest of the sample questions. So Tom is anxious, he's stressed out. His supervisor brings him more work. What's the thing that he feels the most? Right. Might be some of all of these, but presumably the thing he's going to feel the most is being overwhelmed by having all this extra work. And then finally, for managing emotions, Debbie's coming back from vacation. She's peaceful. What should she do to try and preserve that mood? Make a list of things she needed to do. I don't think that would work very well. I'm going to give that a 1. Thinking about where and when she would go on her next. I'm saying maybe... It seems pretty good. Maybe 3 or 4. And then ignore the feeling, and that's not going to help too much, I would think. All right. So that's really the main material from the emotional intelligence module. So let me end this here. And remember, there'll be a longer, but still on the short side, lecture for the material from the motives and goals module.